Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined by Ash Sarkar, who I'm sure has enormous FOMO because, like me, she's not at Labour Party conference.
Do you know something, Michael? The thought of not being amongst all of those, water lobbyists and sort of henchmen sent by Larry Ellison, it really gets a girl down.
We used to go. It used to be us. We'd have events. We'd do. We had a crazy ass event, didn't we? Ed Miliband was playing some sort of game on stage, but times have changed. Labour's in government. And we're going to talk about what they're talking about. The latest from Labour conference includes Rachel Reeves not ruling out tax rises, the arrest of 66 people demonstrating in support of Palestine Action, Andy Burnham taking shots at the Labour leadership, and Torsten Bell taking shots at the Lib Dems. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Keir Starmer went into the Labour Party conference this weekend as the least popular Prime Minister in modern British history. And that does include Liz Truss. So new polling from Ipsos Mori showed that only 13% of Brits are satisfied with the way Starmer is doing his job, while a whopping 79% are dissatisfied, and making him less popular than Sunak, Truss or Johnson, even at their lowest moments. To make matters worse, according to Ipsos, Labour go into the conference 12 points behind Reform in the polls. So they have Reform on 34%, with Labour in second at 22% of the vote. So how would Keir Starmer begin the fight back? Well, he spoke to Laura Kuenssberg.
You mentioned your grave concern about the reform policy, potentially to deport people who already live here. Do you think that's an immoral policy?
Yes, I do. And I think this is fundamental to who we are as a country. We are a proud, tolerant country, reasonable-minded, live and let live, and we are a diverse country where people have come here for centuries to this country to make up who we are. It is one thing to say we're going to remove illegal migrants, people who have no right to be here. I'm up for that. It is a completely different thing to say we are going to reach in to people who are lawfully here and start removing them. They are our neighbours. They're people who work in our economy. They are part of who we are. It will rip this country apart. And if you're patriotic, you want to serve the whole of your country, everybody in your country, and have an ability to bring that country together and walk forward towards the challenges. You cannot do that if you are divisive, if you only truly want to serve a section of our country. And that's why the fight with Reform is different. Most elections have always been Labour or Conservative. This is a different election that we're facing. We have not had a proposition like Reform in this country ever before. We've seen it in France and Germany and plenty of other countries. This is a different fight. It is a fight about who we are as a country. It goes to the soul of our future. It will be heard and the effects will be there for generations. And that's why I'm saying to my party, it's all very well navel-gazing, but we've got a big argument to make here. We've got a big fight that we've got to be in, and we've got to win that fight.
You said that proposal is immoral, to deport people who are already here if they don't pass more stringent rules. Do you think it's a racist policy?
Well, I do think that it's a racist policy. I do think it's immoral. It needs to be called out for what it is.
So Starmer there was talking about the reform policy announced last week to strip people of indefinite leave to remain and make them reapply for visas. It's also the kind of moral critique Starmer doesn't usually hurl at reform. Labour have been more likely to call reform policies unworkable or gimmicky than immoral or racist. That's perhaps because Keir Starmer, or more likely Morgan McSweeney, has wanted to avoid headlines like this. So the Daily Mail today splashed with the headline, "Worried about immigration, Starmer says you're racist." Now, that's obviously not what Keir Starmer said. He said one particular reform policy was racist. Of course, in other respects, the party is desperate to appeal to people worried about immigration, as the new Home Secretary made clear in her conference speech.
The British public will accept those fleeing peril, but they will not do so if there is chaos at our border. Today, the boats continue to arrive, and so I will do whatever it takes to secure our borders. In solving this crisis, you may not always like what I do. We will have to question some of the assumptions and legal constraints that have lasted for a generation and more. But unless we have control of our borders, and until we can decide who comes in and who must leave, we will never be the open, tolerant, and generous country that I know we all believe in.
So it's those comments, I think, about we might have to overcome legal constraints that have been in place for a generation or more. I mean, that seems to me like she's talking about the European Convention on Human Rights or even the Refugee Convention, which would clearly be very significant. This was the major policy announcement, though, in Mahmood's speech.
I know that the British people welcome those who come here and contribute, but contribution is a condition of that welcome. For that reason, we will soon increase the time in which someone must have lived in this country to earn indefinite leave to remain from 5 years to 10. And we will be consulting on this change soon, and as part of that consultation, I will be proposing a series of new tests, such as being in work, making national insurance contributions, not taking a penny in benefits, learning English to a high standard, having no criminal record, and finally, that you have truly given back to your community, such as by volunteering your time to a local cause.
So the difference between Reform and Labour: Reform are going to strip people of indefinite leave to remain who already have it, and then abolish indefinite leave to remain. Unless you get citizenship, you have to apply every 5 years for whatever visa you were on. Labour are going to make it somewhat harder to get indefinite leave to remain. Ash, I suppose we're going to talk about many different aspects of the conference today, but let's focus on Keir Starmer's jibe at Reform and then what Shabana Mahmood announced today.
I mean, starting with Keir Starmer, I think what we're seeing is two things. One is that I think that he genuinely does believe that this is a particularly immoral policy, all right? Because despite his attempts to be tough on immigration and a stalwart patriot, Keir Starmer is still, a North London lawyer. Those are the circles that he moves in. So I think that this is something that he genuinely believes. But I think that the strategy behind it is starting to try and ramp up the message to the Labour base, because really that's who conferences are for, that the choice is vote Labour or get Reform. So you have to, I think, shift the narrative away from, oh, this is unworkable, it's just not sensible politics, to framing Reform as a kind of existential threat. So I think that that's one of the things that explains this shift from condemning something as being unworkable to condemning it as being immoral and racist. So I think it's trying to start, getting the stick with which to, beat Labour voters to get them thinking in those very, very binary terms, because obviously that's something that will benefit Labour. The second thing is Shabana Mahmood. When I was watching Shabana Mahmood, I got this sense of Groundhog Day. And I don't know if you feel the same way, Michael, but every single Home Secretary says the same things, right? Pledges to be tougher than the last, pledges to be, even harder and imposing more conditions. And particularly with Labour Home Secretaries and shadow Home Secretaries, of course, with the exception of Diane Abbott under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, is that they always frame it as, taboo busting, shibboleth destroying. Oh, this isn't like your mother's Labour Party. And it just sort of seems to me to be this endless loop of, Labour Home Secretaries being like, you might not think I'm left-wing enough for you, but, tough luck. They sing this song again and again and again. When it comes to the actual measures, the first thing, which is making indefinite leave to remain available at 10 years rather than 5, is that I think that if you are what I'm going to use here is the language of employment markets, not how I actually think of it. But if you're a sort of high value worker, all right, your skills are really in demand, you could pretty much work wherever you want, wherever in the world. Why would you hang around for 10 years with your life basically being incredibly precarious? And that affects all sorts of things. Are you going to buy a home? Are you going to have kids? What kinds of relationship decisions that you make? Are you going to potentially arrive in a country at the age of 30, not know if you're going to be able to stay there until you're 40, which, for many of us women, it means that it'd be harder for us to have children of our own. Are you going to do that? Or are you going to be like, sod this, I'm going to go to Australia? Sod this, I'm going to go to Canada. Sod this, I'm going to go somewhere else. I just think that it makes the UK a less appealing place to work for people whose skills clearly we really, really need. People whose skills are really, really in demand. And then the last thing, I suppose, is, this hint to take on legal constraints. I think that this is sort of the trap that Labour fall into again and again, which is the extent to which they may wish to sort of reframe their relationship to the European Court of Human Rights, or indeed the Refugee Convention. It's never going to be as far as Reform want to go. So they're always going to be stuck being the piddly little technocrats who are going to be like, oh no, but if we could only just, over here, and Reform come through with a giant sledgehammer. Reform are the ones with the populist energy, and I think that this is the huge contradiction at the heart of this Labour conference, which is, on the one hand, you want to paint Reform as an existential threat, but on the other, you sort of keep giving them the ground to paint Labour as timid and not doing what it takes, and them being the real change makers.
What did you make of her overall argument? Because I suppose the argument, the reason it was supposed to be a Labour speech as opposed to a Conservative speech is she's saying the reason we need to stop the boats and the reason we need to make sure that indefinite leave to remain is explicitly tied to contribution, which is sort of her argument to say you have to not be on benefits at the point you get it. You have to have done some volunteering. I don't know how they're going to sort of measure that. But the argument is that unless Britain can control who arrives, and unless we can show that people are contributing when they get here, the consent for a multicultural, diverse, welcoming society is going to collapse. And I think she did elsewhere in the speech, which we didn't show, she was sort of quite strong against ethno-nationalism. And she's saying, we do not want this country to go down an ethno-nationalist direction where people say that someone like me, obviously speaking in her voice as an Asian Muslim woman, cannot be English, for example. Do you dismiss that, or do you think there is something there?
I liked your moment of Rachel Dolezal, Michael, being like speaking as an Asian Muslim woman. I was like, mashallah, finally you've seen the light of Islam. About that point, that is something that we've got a sort of historical measure for how effective is this. So in the early 2000s, when David Blunkett was Home Secretary, the Blair administration introduced many new conditions for asylum seekers and immigrants. So it's the introduction of things like no recourse to public funds, asylum seekers aren't allowed to work. You had asylum applications going down in terms of the number which were successfully granted, and you had them being replaced effectively with temporary working visas. You had all sorts of discourses going on in the press about assimilating and integrating into British culture in various ways. And it didn't actually stop the march of the far right. It just didn't. So the more crackdowns that Labour promised, the stronger the performance for the BNP was. And if you go back and you look at some of the interviews for BNP councillors and candidates from the early 2000s, they said, well, look, we had the benefit of knocking on doors with the mainstream issue of the day. So I don't think it is the case that policy and policy changes are going to be the thing which inhibits the sort of, rise of much more hardline anti-immigration and indeed, racist political forces. It's the salience of immigration. And this is the weird thing, which is how salient immigration feels, right? How much of a problem people think it is. It has a relationship, I think, to the, raw numbers of immigrants. Of course, that makes a difference. But in terms of the policies around it, particularly for, how difficult are you going to make life for immigrants, that doesn't seem to have an impact on the salience of immigration as a national question. It just doesn't. There's no evidence to suggest that policy interventions actually make a difference. So It's much more to do with the tenor of media coverage, which leads the Labour Party, which in turn has a sort of, legitimising force for the far right. That media coverage, I think, has a relationship to the overall number of immigrants, the raw numbers, but not just that. It's not just to do with that.
I wish I'd got it up actually, but John Byrne Murdoch did a piece, his most recent piece, the FT Data Guy, sort of showing that public concern about immigration does track asylum seeker volumes rather than regular immigration flow. So he's looked at various countries and say that the peak of the concern is when more asylum seekers are arriving, I suppose because it's seen as a lack of control. And I suppose, maybe where I agree with you is that announcing new policies is going to do absolutely nothing. And that I think the reason why immigration is so toxic in this country right now is because we've had government after government after government after government, which has just announced tougher and tougher policies and used sort of harsher and harsher rhetoric. But the underlying issue, which seems to upset people, which is people arriving by small boats, hasn't changed. I do think, I'm not confident about this, but I do think that probably if they could stop people arriving by small boats, that might detoxify the immigration issue a little bit. My understanding is that in Australia, after they did that, it did sort of lower immigration as a sort of salient issue and as a divisive issue. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
So your argument is if you can reduce the number of irregular migrants, that's going to reduce the salience of immigration.
Yeah.
So look, I think that that's part of it, but also my understanding in Australia is that you have also had some like pretty significant far right marches not that long ago as well. So even though you've got a centre left government in power, and there has been a reduction in the number of irregular arrivals in Australia, you still do have a far right. You still do have an ethno-nationalist problem, and I think that that's partly to do with what the sort of political conditions in the Anglosphere are like and what the media culture is like. I mean, the thing about irregular arrivals is that certain forms of irregular arrivals are hyper visible. Others are relatively invisibilized. So visa overstayers, so say you come here on a temporary working visa and then you just don't return, or you overstay on a student visa, that's relatively invisible. Small boats arrivals, and then I think if you cast your mind back to about 10 years ago, Channel Tunnel arrivals, holding on to lorries, that kind of thing, it's a hyper visible form of irregular migration. And I think that there is something about the visuals and the way in which those visuals play in the national imagination. I mean, people literally clinging on to the sides of lorries or arriving by dinghies. I mean, it captures the imagination because it's sort of so tangible and so there, and yet it keeps happening. And it's sort of inherently a disorderly image. But in terms of the overall picture, obviously we're narrowing from overall migration into irregular migration to hyper focus on small boats arrivals, or, as they used to be, Channel Tunnel arrivals. That was only a small part of the picture, but it's the part which has the strongest grip on the sort of national conversation, I think, because of how visual it is.
I agree. It's about how visual it is, not necessarily like the actual consequences of it, but it's this impression of a lack of control. Interesting comment, which I think is an important clarification. So Christy Robertson says, it's already the case that you can't get indefinite leave to remain if you have tried to claim benefits. You also need to pay an extra NHS surcharge, even if you're paying national insurance, which is significant. So basically, most of what Labour is suggesting now is going to make what already applies to people on visas seeking indefinite leave to remain, and it will now apply also to asylum seekers, is my understanding. So at the moment, you have to prove you're not claiming benefits and that you can support yourself to get indefinite leave to remain if you're on a health and social care visa or whatever kind of visa. There has been a humanitarian opt-out. So if you're here on a protection visa, you don't have to prove that. And what Labour is suggesting is that they will also have to prove that. That's my understanding. Obviously, this is still just a speech. It won't become legislation for a while, presumably. Rachel Reeves hasn't had a great run as Chancellor. Her plan to save £1 billion by cutting the winter fuel payment has done more damage than anything else to the Labour government, and she was forced into a U-turn on her bid to cut the welfare bill. So, what was her message to Labour's party conference today?
There is further to go. But whatever tests confront us, have faith. Because our party and our country have overcome greater challenges than these. Have faith. Because the opportunity to serve is what we came into this for. Have faith, knowing that this Labour government will not rest. I will not rest until our patriotic cause is realised.
Have faith. Is that all she's got? Literally just have faith. Believe, guys. It might look bad. Everyone might hate us. The plans are not working out. The economy isn't growing. But have faith. If Reeves has turned to God in desperation, she has good reason when not giving pleas to believe. She's been writing her autumn budget, and it's set to be a painful one. That's because slow growth means to stick to her fiscal rules. Reeves will either need to cut spending or raise taxes. And there was even more bad news for her this weekend. That was because the Office for Budget Responsibility briefed that they will be downgrading Britain's productivity forecast. That, of course, means less projected growth and hence, again, to stick to the rules, more budget cuts or tax rises. And it was that prospect of tax hikes that dogged Rachel Reeves on her media round this morning.
Could you repeat the statement that you made to the CBI? I'm really clear. I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes.
Well, look, I think everyone can see that in the last year that the world has changed and we're not immune to that change, whether it is wars in Europe and the Middle East, whether it is increased barriers to trade because of tariffs coming from the United States, whether it is the global cost of borrowing. We're not immune to any of those things.
So taxes are going up, but we'll find out on whom in 8 weeks' time.
We also know that the Office of Budget Responsibility are reviewing the productivity numbers based on the past productivity experience under the last government and are set to make changes there. And we have to respond to those because it's very important. And this is where the iron discipline comes in, Nick. It's very important that we maintain those commitments to economic stability because we rely on people to buy government debt to be able to finance the things that we're doing as a country. I wish it wasn't so, but I am chancellor in the world as it is, not the world that I might wish it to be.
We understand the chancellors have to choose their words carefully, but translating that means taxes are going up. You have just confirmed.
A reference to iron discipline and living in the world as it is, not how she wants it to be, is, I think, a sort of sideswipe at Andy Burnham, who we'll talk about later in the show, because he said, don't be in hock to the bond markets. And she there is saying she has no choice. Over on Good Morning Britain, Reeves was given an even harder time.
You will not increase VAT in the budget.
The manifesto that we stood on made those commitments around VAT, income tax and national insurance, and we did that for a good reason, and that reason continues to exist. So that's why we made that commitment, and that manifesto commitment stands.
I don't understand. Sorry, Chancellor, with respect, I don't understand why it's such a hard question to simply answer yes or no to. Nobody's asking you for the reason why you put it in the manifesto. Yes. You put it in a manifesto because you wanted to win an election. What people want to know is, are you going to raise VAT? It's a simple yes or no answer.
Yeah. No, the problem is, Susanna, is that as soon as you answer one question, you'll move on to the next one. We made a manifesto commitment about those 3 specific taxes, and that manifesto commitment stands.
So this is Labour's new approach to political interviews, which is don't answer any questions, because if you answer a question, they might ask another one. So just filibuster the whole time. The worst thing you could possibly do is answer question 1, because then they might ask you question 2, and then it could become a conversation. And you don't want a human conversation. That could be completely out of control. Of course, Labour hamstrung itself at the election by ruling out rises to national insurance, income tax, or VAT. And Rachel Reeves said that manifesto commitment still stands. Whether it will stand in a month, though, is less clear. This was Cabinet Secretary Darren Jones on Sky.
Some people are saying that Rachel Reeves has effectively ruled out tax rises in the budget, like VAT, income tax, that's all not moving. And then others are saying that actually she's left herself a bit of wriggle room, it's carefully worded. What is actually the truth?
Well, the truth is today the manifesto stands. I mean, you've seen the wording on that. Rachel's told you that in interviews. The budget is not until November the 26th. So we're not going to say at party conference today what the budget is. We have to tell the country that in Parliament in the normal way.
But will the manifesto stand up the budget?
Well, the manifesto stands today because decisions haven't been taken yet. We've got forecasts coming.
It might change before the budget then.
Well, we've got forecasts coming from the Office of Budget Responsibility. We don't know what those say yet. The first one comes this Friday. We've got another 2 or 3 to go until we get to November. And when the Chancellor is in a position to make decisions, which she will be in the coming weeks, she will make those decisions and then she'll tell the country at budget in the normal way.
So basically you cannot rule out raising VAT or income tax, for example, now?
I'm not ruling anything out or anything in. All I'm saying is today the manifesto stands. We've got a budget process to go through and any decisions will be announced to Parliament in the normal way.
Today, the manifesto, it's such a weird, because the whole point, by the way, I think they should raise some of these taxes, right? So I think they probably should break the manifesto. But the idea that the holding position is the manifesto, which is a pledge for what you will do over the next 5 years, which stands now, might not stand in a month. I'm still sticking to my promises now. Will you break them in a month? I'm still sticking to my promises now. Ash, I should warn you, if you answer my question, I might ask you a second one. So think carefully about if you actually want to do it. But do you think this line is going to hold?
Well, I'm sticking to this answer now. And that's what we're going to say. I mean, there are going to be different Novara live shows and, of course, we'll have to see what the forecasts say. But, I'm sticking to this answer now. I think this is a sort of distillation of what's wrong with how Rachel Reeves and her team do politics. Because rather than leading, and I think that it would be, I think it was a silly manifesto pledge to make, and also all the ruling out of wealth taxes and stuff like that. I think that was really, really dumb, because what they could have done is spent the last, year of government and more than that in terms of, being the Labour top team, building consent for the most wealthy people in our society paying more tax, right? That's what they could have done. And even now, where it seems really difficult to see how there can't be any new tax rises in the next budget, really, really difficult to see how that stands. Rather than building popular consent for that, they're trying to wiggle out of it on a technicality and outsource agency to the OBR. So then the OBR get to literally make the political weather. And then it puts politicians, our elected politicians, who, lest we forget, have a massive parliamentary majority. I mean, absolutely huge. It puts them in this position of passivity. And I think that's why, whenever I think of Darren Jones, whenever I think about Rachel Reeves, I think about computer says no. So they're the ones saying, oh, no, we can't do this. Or, oh, no, we can't do that. But it's not me. It's the computer. It's OBR. It's some kind of, a faceless, automatic run process which exists beyond democratic control. And I just think that's a really, really bad way to run a government, but also to present a government. No wonder so many people are losing faith in democracy. And no wonder so many people hate this Labour Party in particular, because they're essentially saying, all right, we're the interface that you can see between this sort of, number crunching machine that we call the OBR and you. That's our job. Before it was between Labour and Capital. Now it's the electorate and the OBR. If that tells you anything about the degraded status of Labour politicians these days.
John Moore says they politic like lawyers arguing a case before a juryless judge on a technicality, Your Honour, which is exactly what they're like, right? They sort of say, well, you haven't quite got me there because we said it stands now. I haven't committed to anything tomorrow. It's like this technical argument doesn't really work when you're speaking to human beings, not other kind of strange bureaucratic robot people like yourselves. Very, very bizarre. Not looking good for them. There's one topic the Parliamentary Labour Party seems pretty keen to avoid this conference: Palestine. And but the public have different ideas. Here's what happened during Chancellor Rachel Reeves' speech.
After 2 years of genocide, mass starvation of Palestinians.
We understand your cause and we are recognising a Palestinian state, but we are now a party in government, not a party of protest.
So she'd clearly practiced that. It was sort of when she sounded sort of most passionate throughout the whole speech was her response to that. We are now a party of government, not a party of protest. I mean, it did make me feel very annoyed actually about the whole, I suppose, how meaningless it is to recognise Palestine when you're not doing anything to stop the destruction of Palestine. You say, okay, we're going to let you be completely destroyed. We're going to let all the people be starved. But also this state, which is at the moment completely unviable because the people we're refusing to sanction are expanding all their settlements in it, and in Gaza doing a genocide. We're still gonna recognise what's going on. It's a bit like sort of if you say the Holocaust is going on, you're not going to sanction Hitler, but you say, but we'll recognise Israel afterwards. It's like it doesn't really make much difference when a genocide is going on. That was a pretty small demonstration from within the conference hall. Outside it on Sunday, however, there was a much bigger event. So as Labour Party delegates arrived in Liverpool, they were greeted by the sight of around 100 Defend Our Juries protesters peacefully demonstrating about the prescription of direct action group Palestine Action under the Terrorism Act. That prescription was carried out by then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper in July. Since then, it's become new Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood's problem. And by holding up signs saying, I oppose genocide, I support Palestine Action, the protesters were allegedly committing a crime under counter-terrorism law, meaning police soon began making arrests and carrying them away. Merseyside police report that they arrested 66 people under the Terrorism Act at Sunday's protest. Amongst them was this wheelchair user.
Take me with the chair. Please pick up the chair. It's my right to remain in my assistive technology. Take the chair.
Thank you. That's probably not why they joined the police force. An 83-year-old was also arrested, and one protester had to have oxygen delivered for her breathing aid. According to organisers Defend Our Juries, it took police 9 hours to arrest all of the protesters. Since the prescription of Palestine Action in July, over 1,600 people have been arrested for breaking the ban, with further mass actions planned for London this weekend. Other pro-Palestine Labour members have used more formal channels for forcing Israel's genocide in Gaza onto the agenda at Labour conference. So one of the motions put to Labour conference was backed by trade unions Unison and ASLEF and called on the government to employ all means reasonably available to it to prevent the commission of genocide in Gaza. The motion also made it Labour policy to fully suspend the arms trade with Israel and the UK-Israel Trade and Partnership Agreement, and for Labour to accept the findings of the UN Commission of Inquiry. Now, that last clause is particularly significant because that's the UN Commission that found Israel to be committing genocide. Now, that, of course, has long been a conclusion the Labour government have been unwilling to draw. And the Labour leadership did, in fact, table their own motion, which sought to fudge the issue. So Foreign Office Minister Hamish Falconer proposed a motion which suggested the UN said Israel is at risk of committing genocide in Gaza. Now, that's just false. So 2 weeks ago, the UN clearly concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, arguing that the country met both the mental and material components of the crime, so in terms of intent and in terms of consequences. Responding to the Labour leadership's motion, John McDonnell said this: I am absolutely horrified that the minister, so Hamish Falconer, and the leadership is seeking to deliberately mislead Labour members. The UN Commission of Inquiry was unequivocal. It said Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. So you have these two motions that went to Parliament today. One of them said, we accept what this UN Commission said. The other said, we kind of accept what it said, but by the way, it said something it didn't. Which is that there's a risk of genocide instead of what it actually said, which is there is genocide. Now, just before we came on air, Labour conference passed the motion backed by delegates and the unions, which affirms that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. That's the first time the Labour Party has officially recognised that. The government's motion watering down the findings of the UN report has been rejected. So, Ash, as far as I understand, there were people sort of at conference who were complaining because they felt like it had been a stitch-up, because the only people called to speak in the debate were those who backed the government motion, and no one was called who backed the motion from members and trade unions, which, said Israel was committing genocide. Well, an attempted stitch-up, because in fact the grassroots motion passed. So it is now official Labour policy that Israel is committing a genocide, and that therefore all sort of trade relationships with the country should be cut off. Is that significant?
I think the reason why it's important is that it becomes another means by which you can sort of isolate and highlight the absurdity of the Labour government position, which is, oh no, we think this is very bad. Oh, we think there should be a ceasefire and there should be aid. But ultimately, our government position is that we don't think that a genocide is taking place. All right. So the more you can isolate that position from international human rights organizations, from international bodies such as the UN, from the trade union movement, from the Labourship, and now from, what is the Labour Party, official position, the more pressure you can put on a Labour government. And I think that that's where its significance really lies. The other thing is in terms of it then becomes a possible dividing line in any future Labour leadership race. So we're going to talk about Mr. Andy Burnham in a little bit, I imagine, who's sort of flying a kite, shall we say. He's not going anywhere near launching a leadership bid yet. He's just sort of seeing what the conditions are. Is that if you can establish that, conference voted this thing, and it's unequivocal that Israel is committing a genocide, and that if something meets the legal definition of genocide, it means that there are certain, responsibilities that every country that's, signed up to, International Convention on Genocide, it affects what you say you're going to do in government. So I think it's really a kind of campaigning tool, and a way of exerting pressure on politicians than it's going to have any immediate impact on Labour policy.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of the moment where everyone's going to try and deny what happened, the fact that it was Labour Party policy that a genocide was taking place, and still the Labour Party in government sent arms to Israel, should cause some people to feel very uncomfortable, to say the very least. Very much related, the global Sumud flotilla is drawing closer to Gaza, carrying on board a symbolic amount of aid, as well as journalists and activists. Now, amongst them is our colleague, Kieran Andreou. Drone attacks on the ships last week have left us all pretty worried about what could happen when they cross into Israeli-controlled waters in the next few days. Even more worrying was the complete non-response from our own government to the threat posed to British citizens like Kieran on board. So you can imagine the relief when other less cowardly governments stepped in. So this footage shows first an Italian naval frigate, and then further along the horizon, a small fleet of Spanish naval vessels dispatched by the governments of those two countries to accompany the flotilla. It's being reported that earlier today, Turkey sent its own vessel to support the flotilla as it nears far more politically dangerous waters. Earlier today, Kieran sent us this update from the flotilla.
If Israeli intel is to be believed, we expect to be intercepted either tomorrow night or Wednesday night. And by intercepted, I mean kidnapped in international waters by Israeli commandos and brought to the nearest port to be processed by the Israeli authorities. And we never had any delusions or naivety about the high possibility that this might happen, right? Look at previous missions. That's always been the outcome, the end result. But nonetheless, we are sailing to get this aid to Gaza, and we are absolutely committed to that while preparing for, it now looks like, the probable outcome of interception. I would say spirits remain remarkably high, given that this mission is now twice as long than initially anticipated. Everybody's tired, everybody's a bit smelly, everybody misses people back home very dearly. But spirits remain really good, and the nearer we get to Gaza, the better they become, palpably. And even if we are intercepted, there are other really important political dimensions to this mission. Number one, to keep visibility on Gaza as much as possible. And number two, to raise the political stakes for Israel. So at the beginning of this mission, Israel was dismissing us as Hamas, saying that we have Hamas links, and they might still be doing that tacitly. But since the Italian, the Spanish, and now the Turkish navies have got involved, it is very improbable. It's not impossible because we're dealing with Israel, but it's very improbable that there will be a violent interception. It was looking a lot more likely 10 days ago, the drone attacks and so on. So the involvement of those navies has been a massive game changer, and it has been drawn into reality by the flotilla. And it's an example of other states banding together to try, in their own very imperfect and complex ways, with no doubt very complex motivations underlying it, to keep Israel in check when it flagrantly attempts to break international law. The Turkish Navy initially was here to escort the Red Crescent so that it could deliver more humanitarian aid to our ships, to our boats, to be brought to Gaza. And it was also helping with the rescue of a boat that's now been decommissioned from the fleet, ran into trouble last night. It's unclear at this time whether the Turks will stay with us or whether they won't stay with us. Nonetheless, it's a very important intervention.
We'll be keeping you updated on Kieran and the flotilla's progress over the next few days, so keep an eye on social media as well as Novara Media's YouTube channel for updates. I think the fact of those 3 international warships now, what exactly their motives are is somewhat confusing. Of course, we reported on the Italians joining them afterwards, and then people on the flotilla were saying actually the Italians were working in hoc with the Israelis because they were asking the flotilla to hand over aid to the Israelis. But the fact that they're there, I think, makes this very different to previous flotillas and does make it sort of less clear what the outcome is going to be. Andy Burnham has raised the stakes in what appears to be a public feud with the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. Without mentioning him by name, the Manchester mayor had this to say at a fringe event at the Labour Party conference on Sunday.
One thing I am worried about, and I think we do need to debate at this conference, in my view, is how can you have an open debate about all of those things if there's too much of a climate of fear within our party and the way the party is being run? How do you get an open debate about the direction that we need to take to reconnect with the public if a party member is suspended for liking a tweet by another political party, or a member of parliament loses the whip for trying to protect disability benefits or the two-child cap? How do you get to that point if that is the way we're doing things, where debate is being closed down?
Now, those remarks, of course, come in the context of a week of speculation about Burnham's ambitions when it comes to the national Labour leadership. Last week, he was accused of launching a thinly veiled bid to replace Keir Starmer as Prime Minister soon. That followed a profile in the New Statesman where Burnham called for bolder policies and more public ownership. Then this interview in The Telegraph caused even more uproar. So in it, according to the headline, Burnham said MPs in the party were privately urging him to challenge Starmer for the top job. That interview potentially backfired. Lots of MPs were briefing that Burnham had overplayed his hand. But the Manchester mayor has still been freelancing on policies which go against Labour's leader. He spoke to The Guardian today.
Rejoin the EU or stay out?
Long term, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say it. I want to rejoin. I hope in my lifetime I see this country rejoin the European Union. I'm absolutely clear about that. I believe in unions of all kinds. The union that is the UK, the European Union benefited this country. Trade unions. People prosper more when they're part of unions of countries or whatever. That's my belief, so I'm going to say it clearly.
It's just a bit of a straight, I'm in favour of union. Does he think Ukraine should join Russia again? I mean, it's sort of like, if it's a union, I'm in favour of it. I'm not sure how convincing it is. But anyway, Starmer, who is nearly a decade older than Burnham, has previously said he doesn't expect to see the UK rejoin in his lifetime. Burnham's slightly younger. Will Burnham wait until Starmer's leadership comes to a natural end, though? Well, in the Guardian interview, he did walk back his interview in The Telegraph
Well, I didn't actually say that. And partly...
Use this chance to clarify that, but how many people have had that conversation?
Well, no, I didn't say that. And I think, if I'm honest, some of what's happened over the last few days comes from a piece that was overwritten and inaccurate in some respects. I just said that MPs had contacted me over the summer. I didn't say what we'd discussed.
So he's saying that, people are now saying he's overplayed his hand. He's saying that was the fault of the Telegraph, who wrote the story about him and made it seem as if he'd said that MPs were talking to him about whether or not he should replace Starmer, when in fact they were just talking to him about other things, the weather in Manchester perhaps. On his criticisms of how Starmer runs government, Burnham doubled down.
What's wrong with the way it's being run, and how would you do it differently?
Well, I just would go back to the Blair government, the Brown government that I was in. It was different in those days, and I think it was a good way of doing things. I will stand to be corrected by anyone in this room or your good selves about who lost the whip in those years, but I'm struggling to think of people who lost the whip. And actually, there was a sort of feeling then that sometimes voices from all parts of the party are important.
So he's saying how Starmer is more factional than I presume he was talking about Blair or Brown there. So what will have Starmer worried? Because I think it's probably MPs who are friendly to Keir Starmer who are now sort of briefing newspapers, Andy Burnham's really overplayed his hand, he's fucked it, he's an amateur. That might be the case, but this is the polling that will really have Keir Starmer worried. So according to a YouGov poll of Labour members, if there were to be a leadership election between Starmer and Burnham, 62% would go for Burnham, with only 29% voting for the current Prime Minister. Ash, this follows polling suggesting that a majority of Labour members don't want Keir Starmer to be the leader at the next general election. It's also the case that Andy Burnham is more popular with the public than Keir Starmer. What do you think? An argument is that Andy Burnham has overplayed his hand and now looks a little bit sort of silly. When you have to sort of go really far that you have to end up walking it back, it does make you look a little bit amateur. But I mean, he's clearly got something that Starmer doesn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he's got quite a few things that Starmer doesn't. I mean, one, he doesn't have a dreadfully adenoidal voice. Two, I think he's just that little bit more charismatic, intelligenic. But there are, I think, some interesting parallels that you could draw between Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham, which is right now, Andy Burnham sounds a lot like Keir Starmer in 2019, 2020, when he was trying to make a pitch to the Labour membership. So he was trying to present himself as sort of, Corbynism in a suit, 2017 Corbynism in a suit. And you remember those 10 pledges, defend freedom of movement, common ownership and all of this stuff. It was a leadership campaign designed by Morgan McSweeney. There are, I think, very good reasons to think that it was deceptive from the start. But that's the pitch that you make to a Labour membership. And right now, that's what Andy Burnham is doing. And so for me, whether or not he would be practically any different from Keir Starmer down the road in terms of a big old shift to the right, I think that you have to ask yourself, well, what are the forces that would be acting on him? And what does he have in his back pocket to withstand those forces? Having a better speaking voice and being more telegenic isn't all there is to it. So he's going to face pressure from party donors. So at a point where you've got, a declining Labour membership and you've got an awful lot more hands of, big corporate donors and also the trade union donors as well, that exerts a certain amount of political pressure. The political composition of the MPs who you would need to even get on the ballot, that's something that really matters. And I think that he's been trying to open up a bit of a conversation about the kinds of pressures that Labour governments come under. So when he was talking about being disciplined by the bond markets and saying, well, part of the reason why we're so vulnerable to being disciplined by the bond markets, who basically have the power to make the cost of government debt an awful lot more expensive. It's because privatization has made, the running of public services much more expensive. And then the second thing is, the vulnerability of first past the post elected governments. So I think there's some evidence that he's thinking about those things, whether it means, he really would be, the kind of figure that Keir Starmer publicly indicated that he would be at, 2019, 2020 remains to be seen. And you sort of said, oh, does walking it back does that mean that he looks a bit silly? I think that Andy Burnham has had various things handed to him on a platter. So one is the huge, obvious, glaring, slow bleed out weakness that is this Labour government, right? Hugely unpopular, have no real political intelligence, still have, the ghosts of clangers past haunting their back. But also, I think what is an opportunity for Andy Burnham is the implosion of your party. And I think that this is a relevant part to the story. Your party haven't yet released their membership figures since opening up the official membership portal, which was launched by Jeremy Corbyn last week. And so I think we can perhaps take a guess that the membership figures aren't looking too good. Whereas when Zara Sultana launched unilaterally the membership portal, the first time around, it was 10,000 signups in, something like half an hour, 20,000 signups, a couple of hours later. It felt like it was snowballing to being something really big. And that was what the potential of your party was going to be, which was a form of mass politics, right? So, the same way that Corbynism drew an awful lot of its legitimacy from being a movement of 500,000 people, your party was sort of, promising it could be that. And I think that, that's where the real difference with the Green Party would be. All right. If you can say, well, we're a bigger membership party than the Green Party, and we've existed for, a lot less time, we're a mass party. They haven't released their membership figures. So it's sort of, I think we can infer that the membership figures are certainly not looking like they're going to contend with the Green Party anytime soon, which means that it's looking less and less like it can be a mass party. That might change. It might change after its founding conference. It might change if there is a sort of, big influx of energy from the grassroots, or there's a, sort of catalyzing leadership election. It doesn't look like it's going to be a sort of a mass opportunity for the left. Andy Burnham comes along and he's like, okay, government have fucked it. But also this contender, which really could have done Labour some damage, is a left twisting in the wind. I mean, it seems like it's in a spot of real peril, and it's unclear whether it can be a mass party. Andy Burnham starts looking better to people, and this isn't me saying that he is a genuine left-wing alternative. I don't think he is, right? That's just my feeling. I don't think he is, but I think he can take advantage of these two things, the weakness of a Labour government and the very recent implosion of your party.
The options with Andy Burnham is that either, not in terms of would he be leader, but in terms of what one makes of him politically, is that either he's just an opportunist who sort of, his positions just float in the wind with whatever is sort of most amenable to his career advancement. So that's why, he was a Blairite under Blair, a Brownite under Brown, a Milibandite under Miliband, Corbynite under Corbyn. I mean, he's never quite a Corbynite, but he was, much friendlier than other people in the party to Jeremy Corbyn. He didn't resign his front bench seat. And so that you'd say, well, he just floats in the wind. Whoever can influence him once he's prime minister, he becomes prime minister. Well, he'll just completely fold. The more sympathetic way of looking at it is that maybe he has changed because he has, maybe going away and being mayor of Greater Manchester has given him a different perspective on politics and a little bit more sort of independence of thought, because he's actually run something and he has seen, what doesn't work in Britain, and now he has some stronger ideas about what one could do nationally. I think the jury's still out on which one of those is closer to the truth. I imagine it's a little bit of both. Torsten Bell is a very accomplished man. He led one of the country's most influential think tanks and now has a top job in the Treasury. But he still looks just a little bit like an overgrown schoolboy, and sometimes he acts like one too.
What Britain needs to tackle Farage is a vision, And the vision they need is not a fat bloke in a wetsuit, which is what the Lib Dems have got to offer.
What? Like, that's just mean. Like, he does look kind of, I mean, maybe I'm being mean by saying he looks kind of like a schoolboy, but saying someone looks kind of like a schoolboy is much more polite than saying someone's fat. Like, his critique of the Lib Dems is that he's fat and wears a wetsuit. The wetsuit reference is obviously because the Lib Dems do all of these stunts and Ed Davey sort of does silly things to try and get on the news. Ash, is it a sign of political desperation that the Labour Party are now just calling their opponents overweight?
I don't think it's desperation. I just think that, remember when Keir Starmer, removed the candidacy from Faiza Shaheen? It's because he wanted the highest possible quality candidates. Obviously, that's not what he wanted. He wanted loyalists. And I think that actually the candidates he got aren't particularly talented, aren't particularly inspiring communicators, and aren't particularly emotionally intelligent. I mean, that's the kind of barb which comes across as quite mean. I mean, look, I've said some mean things in my time. And look, I think that at a sort of booze-fueled Labour Party conference, people can say things which are indecorous and unkind. But I think it sort of speaks to, the fact that Keir Starmer didn't get high-quality candidates. He got loyalists, and he got rid of, quite talented candidates or more skilled communicators, at least, because they had the wrong politics.
Someone says, not sure saying someone is a schoolboy is less bad than being fat. Davey is worthy of a bit of stick. I'm not saying being fat is bad, but I think calling someone a fat man in a wetsuit is meaner than saying someone looks a bit like an overgrown schoolboy. And I will stand by that. Ash, thank you for joining me this evening.
I've got a ragu bubbling on the hob, so I'm going to go downstairs and check the seasoning.
Fantastic. Your internet hasn't been that great today, Ash. You're going to have to sort that out before next Monday. I don't know why I'm saying you'll still be welcome on the show, even if you're a little bit, glitchy, but could have been better. Your contributions, of course, fantastic, as always. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back on tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.